Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. Okay, so the title, as you will already know if you've clicked on this podcast episode, is One in 4,000. And so, what this episode is my appreciation, celebration, and reflections on one of my absolute favorite books that I have read in the past couple of years, and definitely the only like time management based book that I would recommend to anyone at this point. So, the name of this book is 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And what I want to do in this episode is share a couple passages and a couple of the core ideas of this book, and then give my reflections on how it applies to the unique features of a healthcare human's situation and socialization. Okay. So the context of how I found this book is I had already done quite a bit of time management um, training and applied it to my life. I had already gotten quite efficient with my charting and had done a lot of time blocking and other like concepts related to being more efficient with my time. And those were helpful. Those were successful at doing what they were meant to do. And I think those are a really great place. And when I picked up this book, part of the place I was in was still realizing like the to-do list is unending and sort of asking like, how do I actually choose what I want to do with my time? I still was trying to jam everything into my schedule and wasn't making realistic estimates of what I could do with my time. And this book really helped me with that. It was a big perspective shifter for me. And one of the things that Oliver Burkeman talks about in this book is how he was a bit of that, like a time management efficiency junkie too. He was trying all the different strategies and finding them somewhat successful, but he found like something was missing too. And so, yeah, I'm sharing this because one of the most common concerns I'm hearing from colleagues, from residents I teach, and from my coaching clients is overwhelm, anxiety, shame, guilt, overwhelm with there's too much to do and we don't have enough time to do it. And the thing that this book brings into perspective is like, I guess a spoiler up front is like, the answer to that is yes. There is too much to do and we only have so much time. And actually embracing that is, and really understanding that that is like very, very true, is a remarkable strategy to helping you then choose what you want to do with your life, right? The subtitle of this book is Time Management for Mortals. And that kind of gives a clue. It's very philosophical and yet somehow practical, and I enjoy it for that reason. The other disclaimer I will say is I have read, according to my Amazon Kindle app, about 53% of this book. So it's possible the second half is like even more amazing, or it totally goes off the rails. So I do not endorse the second half of this book purely because I have not read it, because I'm a book snacker. I think I've said this before, either on the podcast, at least on social media for sure. I love to just snickety snack on the books. I eat the portions, I read the portions that I want to, and then when I am interested in doing something else, I do something else, which I feel like Mr. Oliver Burkeman would appreciate because it's a little bit emulating the concepts that the book espouses, at least in the first half. Watch, there's a chapter it's like always read a book all the way through. I just never get to that chapter. Well, you take what you want from anything in terms of learning experiences in life, right? So in any case, really like the thing I find really helpful about this book, in particular for those of us who work in healthcare, is like we have seriously warped socialization, mindset, mental stories, really inhuman stories about what we think we are capable of doing. Or even if we recognize we're not capable of doing, that somehow doesn't translate into us thinking we can't do it. We're like, then just feel guilty that we're falling asleep trying to do all the work. There's something wrong with us that we cannot do everything. And we also are very deeply aware of our mortality, considering the work we do. Even if you don't do palliative care, like if you work in healthcare, you have a front row seat to our mortality, period. I mean, if you're human in the world and you look around at the world, you also do, but like it is our work to, you know, to work with mortals and mortal bodies, so I think that for me it sort of hit in that deeper level of like, oh my gosh, yes, like it was sort of like when I was reading and learning a lot about embodiment stuff, and I was like, right, I work with bodies. So the same thing here where it's like, right, I am also mortal, same as my patients. And what does that mean about my choices? And what do I want to do about that fact, which is just straight true, right? And so what this book and these ideas that I'm sharing gave me fuller permission to do is just to set aside any amount of expectations from the outside world and really focus on what I want to do, including like kind of two pieces of it, right? Like one is how much do I want to work, period. Um, like in terms of like in my calendar week, like how do I want to spend each chunk of time? How many days do I want to spend in clinic? How many days do I want to spend doing coaching? Like that piece, super, super helpful. And then even within each of those chunks, so say I'm like on my clinic day and I'm with a patient, this still applies of like what pieces of what I could possibly do in this room with this one person am I intentionally consciously choosing, and recognizing I am absolutely letting go and missing out on all the other things that I possibly could be choosing, because the amount of work we could be doing is infinite. The amount of counseling and screening and um properly coaching someone, like it could be infinite. And so this book just reminds us that time is fixed and our mortality is real. um so if that kind of talk is not of interest to you, I don't know that the rest of this podcast is going to be for you. But if even a part of you is curious, please keep listening, because I'm sorry to remind you of your mortality, but it's real. And honestly, embracing it has been a beautiful thing. It's not like all doom and gloom. It's the opposite. It's a way to then celebrate and feel so good about what I am doing, right? So I'm planning to read, it's like 3 passages from little paragraphs from the book. And then after each paragraph, I'm going to give my thoughts on it. So here's the first passage, which is actually like the very first passage of the introduction of the book. The average human lifespan is absurdly, terrifyingly, insultingly short. Here's one way of putting things in perspective. The first modern humans appeared on the plains of Africa at least 200,000 years ago, and scientists estimate that life in some form will persist for another 1.5 billion years or more, until the intensifying heat of the sun condemns the last organism to death. But you, assuming you live to be 80, you'll have about 4,000 weeks. That's the title of the book. Certainly, you might get lucky, make it to 90, and you'll have almost 4,700 weeks. You might get really lucky, like Jean Calment, the French woman who was thought to be 122 when she died in 1997, making her the oldest person on record. Calment claimed she could recall meeting Vincent van Gogh. She mainly remembered his reeking of alcohol. And she was still around for the birth of the first successfully cloned mammal, Dolly the sheep, in 1996. But biologists predict that lifespans within striking distance of Calment could soon become commonplace. Yet even she got only about 6,400 weeks. Expressing the matter in such startling terms makes it easy to see why philosophers from ancient Greece to the present day have taken the brevity of life to be the defining problem of human existence. We've been granted the mental capacities to, I'm sorry, I'm going to leave this all in. I just had a panic moment that I wasn't recording, but I am. I'm going to take that sentence again. Apologies for that. Expressing the matter in such startling terms made it easy to see why philosophers from ancient Greece to the present day have taken the brevity of life to be the defining problem of human existence. We've been granted the mental capacities to make almost infinitely ambitious plans, yet practically no time at all to put them into action. End quote. Thoughts already? I think I've gotten into the habit, and it's kind of it's not a fully compassionate delight I get, where I'll be in conversation with like a friend or someone I know, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I've been reading this book and it's called 4,000 Weeks, because that's the average amount of time that we have on Earth. And then people are like, what? Because 4,000 weeks, if you say days, it's like a much larger number. And you're like, okay, but there's something like, I know how long a week is, and I get 4,000 of them. It's like a kind of, it's a number that is concrete. That, because when you think of a whole year, you're like, that's pretty long. But like a week, you feel it in your body how long a week is. And we get 4,000 of them. Maybe if we live to 80, right? That's another factor in this, is we actually don't know how many weeks we get or how many days we get, right? And there's something about that people usually kind of freak out a little bit. And I have a sick delight of it. I'm going to be honest. I feel like it's sort of like, when you look up at the stars and you realize how teeny, teeny, tiny we are in the universe, and you have that sort of like out of body, brain blown kind of sensation. For me, that number really helps. It's very perspective offering to me. And so if you just had a little reaction, you're welcome. Because it's real. So some other thoughts I wanted to say about this is like, I feel like even this opening paragraph and the rest of this book, it just puts language to exactly why all like time management and efficiency strategies are simultaneously essential and futile, depending on like the goal of it. Like the fact that we have a concrete finite amount of time on Earth means like, well, let's try and use it well, quote unquote. But it's sort of about what's the definition that we want to choose of what using it well means. That's gotten totally sort of ripped out of our graphs, and we've been told all the ways we need to use it well, and all those ways added up are too many ways. And so that's why it is also futile. You know what I mean? And it really gives like a reality check to any notions that we have of being like on top of it all, or getting it all done, or doing it all. Like that's not possible. It's only reason any of those are possible is if you define the it in that statement extremely concisely and clearly, which is a lot of what the rest of the book and the ideas of the book are, is like defining what your it is in terms of like on top of it all, getting it all done, doing it all. Like the it is the part you get to decide. And, if you decide it concretely and minutely enough, you have a realistic amount of it, you can do it all. And that will involve some existential crises. It's kind of what the book is about. So yeah, I think that is so helpful, just to know we cannot possibly, once you think about it, it's so absurd. It's like, right. So then what do I want to do? Understanding I have approximately 4,000 weeks to do it, One part of what he says at the end there that I think is so true, but that may not like completely resonate depending if you have the same healthcare human socialization mind as me, is like when he says like, we've been granted the mental capacities to make almost infinitely ambitious plans. I think a lot of healthcare humans don't actually think of ourselves as ambitious. I certainly didn't used to. We have such a sort of warped sense of what we are supposed to be doing that we actually are like, I'm not ambitious. Like, I'm just like trying to work hard enough to get by, to like pass. We're like not even aware that the scope of what, and I mean this not specifically and only for physicians, but truly anyone who works in healthcare. There's something about, and maybe like many people's jobs, like I think lots of humans who work, period. And I will speak for who I know, which is healthcare humans. Our job descriptions continue to expand and then include a lot of things that are like literally impossible to do. So that's why we feel like we're always failing, and we're not ambitious. We're just like trying to like hustle to like keep up, to like pass, right? So like, yeah, when you think about it, like the scope of what we've been tasked to do is beyond ambitious, right? So like when you really think about, and if you use the guide of like what you feel guilty about not being able to do, what you beat yourself up about for not being able to do, those are the hints of what you deep down believe is like what your ambition should be. That you will not feel satisfied, you will not think you've done enough unless you're an all-knowing, complex thinking, hyper efficient, completely likable professional with every single human you encounter for 8 to 12 hour stretches at a time, ideally with no breaks for you to be a human person. Like that that's not ambitious, that's delusional. And yet that is what we may not fully consciously think. It's like, I can't know everything. And yet when you think about how we emotionally react to not knowing a thing, inside of us, we have an embodied belief that this is the ambition we should be striving for. This is it's actually kind of not a mental capacity, in my view, as Oliver's saying. It's like a somatic expectation that we've been given from the outside that you cannot stop trying to do it all until you will not feel safe in your body until you've met this standard that I've just described, which is actually impossible, right? So again, that's where it's like we have this like deeply embedded ideal of what we should be doing that is not possible for actually any human, no matter how much time they have. But there's something then about taking something we are aware of, which is the fact of our mortality and the fact that time actually is limited. And it can help us to start to decondition those other beliefs. Because the way that you start really deconditioning, say, the belief of like, I have to be all knowing or I have to be completely likable, is you consciously aren't those things. You feel the discomfort of it and you keep doing it anyway. And your body over time learns, oh, it is safe to just actually be a human here. You consciously, actively practice offering yourself compassion instead of beating yourself up. You treat yourself as if you are a good person, even when you don't know every answer, and your body starts to leave you over time, right? And we can do that when we have other ideas of our limitations there to help set boundaries around that for ourselves. And so the time one and mortality one is like a super helpful thing, right? So the thesis of this book is basically about seeing ourselves and our capacity and our mortality for what it truly is, a clear set of limitations on what we are capable of doing with our time on Earth. This can feel pessimistic or self-defeating, but actually I have found it to be the opposite. Like the more I have fully embraced my real human limits, how my human body and mind actually work and work best for me based on the criteria of what feels best for me, and noticing that that does actually produce my best work, say in conversation with a patient or making a podcast or whatever, right? So when I am in that space of really embracing my limitations, I have a much deeper sense of satisfaction and joy in the incredible work that I am doing. And I continue to choose to do that on purpose. And my belief in that is actually how I can then create the biggest impact for others as well. So it's not selfish in the sense of when I am in that space, I am serving the world best because I am including myself in the world's definition, you know? So those are my thoughts on the first passage. The second passage just says so much more about limit embracing. And so I just like the way he writes. I find him kind of funny too. I think he is from the UK and you can kind of tell. Okay, so the second part's about embracing your limitations. In practical terms, a limit embracing attitude to time means organizing your days with the understanding that you definitely won't have time for everything you want to do or that other people want you to do. Very important for us in healthcare. And so, at the very least, you can stop beating yourself up for failing. Since hard choices are unavoidable, what matters is learning to make them consciously, deciding what to focus on and what to neglect, rather than letting them get made by default, or deceiving yourself that with enough hard work and the right time management tricks, you might not have to make them at all. It also means resisting the seductive temptation to keep your options open, which is really just another way of trying to feel in control, in favor of deliberately making big, daunting, irreversible commitments, which you can't know in advance will turn out for the best, but which reliably prove more fulfilling in the end. And it means standing firm in the face of FOMO, the fear of missing out, because you come to realize that missing out on something, indeed on almost everything, is basically guaranteed. which isn't actually a problem anyway, it turns out, because missing out is what makes our choices meaningful in the first place. End of quote. Don't you like the way he writes? Maybe not everyone will, because everyone likes different styles, but I just find it very pragmatic and also kind of beautifully written, honestly. And especially that last bit where how can we, like, the joy of missing out, if you've heard of that instead, how do we really like celebrate and enjoy missing out on most things, because we absolutely will. So some thoughts I have for this part. The part about keeping your options open, so that can be, I don't know about you, but I certainly historically have really struggled to just like make decisions in general. And I think part of it can be what we think of as like that decision fatigue. You make decisions all day at work, and then at home, you're like, I don't even know what I want for dinner. But I think that's like more also speaks to the fact that we're afraid of making the wrong choice wherever we are. And that includes, I don't, you decide what we want for dinner for sure. It also includes like times, so say you're like procrastinating things at work, procrastinating actually filling out the form, procrastinating making that call to the patient's family, procrastinating making a clinical decision at all. It's because we're worried about making the wrong one. And I think the thing that I'm drawing from this paragraph is one of the reasons we're doing that, to kind of compound on my past episode on procrastination being protective. It's a way to feel in control when we actually cannot control the outcomes, right? Like we all we are ever doing is making a conscious best guess based on our knowledge and experience when we do any of those things. And as Burkeman says here, making that consciously on purpose is actually how you can make your highest quality decision. And all of the fear of it, of getting it wrong, all that is getting in the way of your creative complex thinking, because probably that first impulse is a great one, and just make it and move on, right? Um, the second part I wanted to talk about that from that passage is like just about FOMO, because I see I see the FOMO like in a couple of ways. So one way is for a lot of us, when you kind of think of FOMO as like, oh, I could be going out to the club with my friends kind of thing, a lot of us may feel like consciously like we have given up that, and we're like, we don't get FOMO for that. Like we get that our friends on social media in different careers get to have fun, adventurous lives, but like we chose to sacrifice early. We sacrificed our 20s, we've sacrificed our teens to get into the fancy schools, right? Like we have been on the path of sacrifice. We chose on purpose to miss out on so much of like the fun, quote unquote, frivolous, whatever thing. So it's like, I don't really have FOMO in that way. But underneath, just check if this is true for you. It's certainly for me. There's absolutely a part of us that is terrified of what we're missing. And it might not come till later in life, because we do get a sort of reward for all the sacrifice we're doing. But especially if you ever felt like annoyed or really judgmental of or envious or resentful of friends or neighbors who have so much free time, who are able to spend more time with their kids or go on vacations or whatever, those are kind of a secret FOMO in disguise. It's not fear. We're not like, oh no, I wish I could be doing those on our conscious level. We've buried that part of ourselves because we think we're not allowed to want those things because we've chosen this important path. But underneath, it's like its own little form of FOMO, you know? Another way that comes out is like, so when we do have time off, we feel like we have to make the most out of it. That's a kind of FOMO as well, where it's like, oh, I finally have a week off. Oh my gosh, I have to make sure I do 5 million things, whether it's fun things or other productive things. Like if you're constantly feeling like you have to fill your life, whether it's your free time or your work time, with so many things, check if that isn't fueled out of a fear of missing out. It's an interesting thing. It's like, well, if I just do as many things as possible, then I'm not going to miss out on it. Whether it's like in a clinical perspective, like I'm going to try and jam as much into every appointment so I don't miss anything, or even on a vacation, I'm going to see all of the sights to see, even if I'm exhausted, right? So it's all kind of FOMO underneath is one way to view it. And so when we think about then how we want to let this stuff go, or we're, if you're accepting the invitation to just try on, all right, maybe I'm going to embrace my limitations here, right? Like, what would that actually look like? I'd be recognizing like, oh, I really only have this one life of 4,000 weeks. Hey, and Am I really at peace about the amount and manner of which I'm working now? Is there a deeper part of me calling for me to make a different kind of conscious choice about how I spend my time? Would I be doing what I'm doing if I was doing it consciously? Would I be working as much as I'm working if I was doing it consciously, intentionally, with myself in mind? Yeah. Even would I have a vacation the way I'm having it, intentionally, on purpose, with myself in mind? That's what recognizing the other goal we were trying to chase, which is doing the most, is impossible. We will always miss all the things. We will miss that vacation destination. We will miss a certain aspect of a patient's history. We will miss stuff. There's too much stuff, period. So it's like, if we know that to be true, and so we're going to refocus on a different motivation, what do we actually want? What do we want to do? Right. This, I will say, even happens like as you start to let go of things that don't feel so good. And now you're actually like, oh, maybe I'm in charge of my own life and my own decisions. We can kind of panic, like, now what? What do I actually want? I've only ever done what other people told me was the right path to success and satisfaction. And like, wait, now I have to decide that path for myself. It can feel kind of like overwhelming, you know? And sometimes even in that space, certainly for me, it was the case where I still took on too much, even though it was like, it felt good and there were things that I liked to do. And I was like, what do I want? I still was like kind of binging on everything I thought I wanted and not actually accepting the limitations of like 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 4,000 weeks in a lifespan, you know? And so that's actually this third passage, which is like the last like big passage I'm going to read. This one kind of smacked me in the face because I read this book, like I said at the beginning, like, um, a year and a half or so into really doing some big transformations in my life and being like, wow, I can be so much more efficient. I can get stuff done. I can, you know, my inbox can be clear. My charts can be done. Look at how, like, what else can I do? And like taking on so much, being like, look, I can do so much. I can do so much. Um, and feeling like it was fun and it was going well, but I was like, gosh, there's still a lot on the plate and I still am not doing everything and things are falling off the radar and the to-do list is still infinite and like, am I missing out on something? Not missing out like fear of missing out, but like, am I missing a secret that I need to figure out? And I would say this next section was very annoying to hear, but felt true to hear. So I am sharing it with you. So like the title of this passage was The Principle of Resisting the Allure of Middling Priorities. And this is what he writes. There is a story attributed to Warren Buffett, although probably only in the apocryphal way in which wise insights get attributed to Albert Einstein or the Buddha, regardless of their real source, in which the famously shrewd investor is asked by his personal pilot about how to set priorities. I'd be tempted to respond, just focus on flying the plane. But apparently this didn't take place mid-flight because Buffett's advice is different. He tells the man to keep a list of the top 25 things he wants out of life and then to arrange them in order from the most important to the least. The top 5, Buffett says, should be those around which he organizes his time. But contrary to what the pilot might have been expecting to hear, the remaining 20, Buffett allegedly explains, aren't the second tier priorities to which he should turn when he gets the chance. Far from it. In fact, they're the ones he should actively avoid at all costs because they're the ambitions insufficiently important to him to form the core of his life, yet seductive enough to distract him from the ones that matter most. You needn't embrace the specific practice of listing out your goals, I don't personally, to appreciate the underlying point, which is that in a world of too many big rocks, it's the moderately appealing ones, the fairly interesting job opportunity, the semi-enjoyable friendship on which a finite life can come to grief. It's a self-help cliche that most of us need to get better at learning to say no. But as the writer Elizabeth Gilbert points out, it's all too easy to assume that this merely entails finding the courage to decline various tedious things we never wanted to do in the first place. In fact, she explains it's much harder than that. You need to learn how to start saying no to things you do want to do with the recognition that you have only one life. End quote. So How do you feel after that? This part pissed me off. I remember like being like, ah, when I read it, because I was like, oh, no, I want to do so many things. I have this podcast. I want to do so many things with coaching. I want to do so many things with my patients. I want to do groups. I want to do this. I want to do that. And I was feeling the overwhelm of like, wait, I have so many great ideas. I'm finally in a space where I'm feeling like excited about my life. But I was overwhelmed and kind of not doing much, or doing like teeny bits of a billion things and being like, is this how it's supposed to be? So the fact that if you really think of your life and what is most important to you, the sixth thing on that list of what's most important to you has got to be enemy number one, because it's going to keep you from thing 1 through 5, which if you really dedicate your time and energy to, you can do in a way that is going to have the most satisfying impact. And I don't think it's literally like 5 and then you're done, but when you think about your week, like even thinking about relationships, right? So if you want to keep the the semi enjoyable friendship, I felt like that's like, that has been me in past lives. We're like, well, they're nice enough and they keep asking me to coffee, but would I rather be doing something else? Maybe, but aren't I supposed to have lots of friends? Like it's really interesting how we can do this in many domains, not just in work at all. And so it's like, right, like if I only have 24 hours a day, and a bunch of those, you got like 8 out of those you got to sleep, so you have like less than 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. what do you which thing is your top thing? So even someone who's really lovely, even someone where it's a quick favor, even and thinking of work. So even a task, it's not so hard. These are the quick and easy tasks. But when you add them all up, you know, they are not what you wish to do with your time. A question that I've heard in the coaching space a lot is like, what is like the highest and best use of my time? Or what's the most impactful use of my gifts? Those still have like a kind of a energy of obligation to them. So that's why I really like to like, what does your body love to do the most? What do you find the most satisfying? Because in my opinion, those are lead out of your gifts and actually are your true talents, are the things that light you up and nourish you and resource you and feel so good to do, just feel super yummy. And so it's like, which of those are the things that are like the yummiest portion of the meal, and really like focusing on that and leaving out the pretty tasty sides, right? Um, that is how we can have enough space to actually enjoy and also actually fully and thoroughly do the main piece of the thing, right? So what would that look like for you? Kind of reflecting. Is it like, yeah, I work in 10 places and I'm always zooming around, and like, so if I worked in less places, if I narrowed my scope, if I worked less hours, if I actually kept all that the same, but when the patient comes in and asks for 5 things, I go with what I choose, and even share with the patient like, it's sort of like that setting boundaries language of like, we've got to find the main meal here. We're going to, if we also try and get distracted by the sides, I'm not going to fully do a good job of cooking this main meal for you. And that's going to not feel satisfying. It's not going to be what brings the best impact. And so I just think, as you start to walk towards, right, what if I am in charge of my life and my time? Because I am the only one that I can control, and I am mortal and I want to make different choices, right? This can be a powerful exercise to do. If it's overwhelming to do it for your entire life, even just choose like one domain of your life, like relationships or hobbies, or like whatever it is you feel like, I feel like I have too many of these, or I'm constantly trying to impossibly struggle balancing all of these. How many committees you're on, how many initiatives you're a part of, they're all important. How many like causes you advocate for, like all of that can feel like super important. It all is important for someone. But if you want something to be really impactful and feel good about it and really give it the attention it deserves from you, because you are invested and passionate about it, you're cheating on it if you're doing too many other things, right? Like, and if that analogy doesn't work for you in terms of infidelity, go back to the meal one, like whatever one works for you, right? Like, but the idea is like, yeah, the most important first step is like, oh, I am mortal and I am in charge of my own life. And then the second step is like, I cannot do all the things that outside of myself and even inside of myself I want to do. And so this third sort of chapter is like, so how do I choose? And it is like in a hyper focused, prioritized way, you know? And it's a process. That's the other thing. I don't think like you have the same top 5 forever, right? So like there have been times where one of my top 5, and I don't have like an official top 5, but like, my things where it's like this is on my plate for this week, for this month, have been things I've created, like courses I've created, talks I've been working towards, things that work, right? But it's really knowing, it's like, okay, I want to dedicate enough time and energy to what's happening in this work. So when I look at my whole calendar, I've run into this a little bit over the last couple of months where I'm like, right, there's things I want to do at work. I also actually committed to some other things over here. This actually is making me feel like I'm working slightly beyond my capacity. And again, just relearning the lesson of like, okay, next time really look at that full calendar and say, am I willing to drop this one off the list in order to add this one in? Very helpful for if you happen to be a parent or signing your kids up for activities. It's like, sure, they could be in 50 activities, and what else were you going to do with that time, and what is according to your values and what you want to do with your life, like what is valuable to you and to your kiddo as they start to age, right? So that's that third section. So in terms of how to like apply this practically, I've talked through some of like the ways you sort of apply it generally. One way I apply this practically is I do have a weekly practice. And when I say weekly practice, full disclosure, I don't do it every single week. When I first started doing it, I was very diligent doing every week. And recently I've come back to it. And maybe I actually will invite myself to continue to invite myself to do it weekly, because I just described how I overfilled my calendar last month. And I'm just reflecting on maybe it's because I stopped doing this weekly practice. So there you go. Everyone's learning, including me. So I will do, it used to be Sunday, and now it's like the first hour or so of my Monday morning. I list out and I sort of collect all of the places I have to-do lists, like my inbox and a little to-do list app I keep. And I also just in my brain, I'm like, what else do I want to do this week? What else is coming to me? And I list them all out. And then I sort through them and decide which I'm actually going to commit to doing. And then the rest are dead to me. I'm crossing them off the list. If I feel super hoardy about it, I can always like put them on the to-do list for next week. But I do try and just like kill them if I can, because they will come back to me if they are truly mine in the future. But for now, I'm like, what's my, not actually like top 5, but what are my things I'm doing on my calendar, right? And one thing I added this week in preparation for this podcast was I looked up what's my week out of 4,000, knowing this is one of 4,000, but which one? And so for me, this is my 1,971st week of life. So I'm almost at the halfway point. And there was something I put that, I'm like week 171 out of, 1,971 out of 4,000. I put that at the top and then I listed them all, and it was interesting what I just deleted. I'm like, no, and you get into a practice of it. You don't even put them on the list anymore. It's great. I never put clean my house on the list, for example. That comes in fits and starts. So it's really interesting how actually saying what number it is for you, that could be like an interesting, very practical thing you could apply. And also when I like look at this list and I'm like, I'm torn in so many directions. So like I definitely clear space and cross out anything that my body doesn't want me to do. I think of what will feel good to do. What have I found satisfying to do in the past? I find those really clarifying for me. And yeah, then I go through, I put them on the calendar. I leave a certain amount of time. So quick and easy ones I like do right there in the moment. And that's like my general process, I actually talk about this process and some of the other like human body focused time management tricks that I do find helpful in my Restoring Your Time course, which I think you'll have heard. It's on sale for this entire month, December 2023. So just like second plug for that. So if this has made you start thinking about time and you're like, but where do I even begin? How does this apply to the inbox? How does this apply to charting? Like how, it sometimes helps to get more specific about certain areas of how we manage workflow and time, because we have like layers of socialization of why we think we have to do things the way they do. So I encourage you 50% off that course, which means I think it's like $43 Canadian. What else do you spend $43 Canadian on? You know what I mean? Like, why not spend that on something that's an investment for you and actually like getting serious about like, oh, right, this is one of 4,000. And how about I get a little help and support with actually understanding how I could do things differently, right? So, mini plug there. Sorry, just had to pop it in. Um, yes. And so the last thing I will say is there is a way that you can get into almost like a time scarcity spiral about this idea, and I totally get it. And you might just need that spiral because it's sort of like the grief reaction of like, oh dang, I am mortal, you know. And you might need it to actually face reality instead of just pretending that you might be immortal, which is no one's thinking that consciously, but the way we act sometimes it's as if we don't think time is passing, you know? And so if we need that spiral, we will embrace it, we will metabolize it. So it gets to the point where it fuels you to ask yourself, like, what do I want to do with this single life of mine, with this one of 4,000 weeks of my single life that I get, right? And so I think that could be important. And I want to leave you with this last quote from the book that I like very much because it kind of flips it on its head as well. Why treat 4,000 weeks as a very small number because it's so tiny compared with infinity, rather than treating it as a huge number because it is so many more weeks than if you had never been born? I think we have to understand there is an actual limit to the number just so that we can really start to face the absurdity of the infinity expectations we have on us. And then we can really embrace our humanity, embrace our capacity, embrace the natural boundaries of our mortality and our bodies, right? And once we do that, then instead of looking out at everything we're missing and everything that's impossible, we can look in and focus on the incredible life we have chosen to have on purpose in the face of everything that we could be doing. Like, it's so liberating to know we could never even possibly do everything. And it's like so satisfying, and it makes everything we do choose to do so sacred. And that's sort of the last idea I want to leave with you. Like, knowing right now you are living one of 4,000 weeks of your life. How's it going? Is this the week you would choose on purpose? And no shame from me at all if you're like, actually, no, it means you are a human being on this planet. We're not adding perfectionism as like, well, what's the perfect week I could have? No. But what we're saying is like, if we feel really off of where we wish we could be, where our bodies are screaming to us to be, we can take a breath. We can practice embracing that that is the truth of it and use it as fuel to start working towards the life we really want, the work we really want to be doing, the way we really want to be practicing medicine, showing up for our patients, contributing to our healthcare system, the way we also want to be a human outside of our workplace and what else we want to have in our life. You can do it. I think doing it one small bit at a time, one tiny experiment at a time, that's how I typically teach it with like coaching clients is we don't take it all on at once. We do it a little bit at a time, but it's possible. It's possible. I am one of many, many living examples of how it absolutely is possible. And you can be too. So that's my pitch to you. What do you want to do with this one out of 4,000 weeks of your singular life? With that question, I hope it is a good week. I hope you notice the parts you choose on purpose and really celebrate them. And I'll see you next week.